This is Miami Total Football Radio, and we finally have actual soccer to talk about. Inter Miami kicking off the MLS is Back tournament against Orlando City, the Sunshine Classic, as it's known on this podcast, but not before a stunning moment of silence took place, a silent protest in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter movement, and as a tribute to George Floyd, reminiscent of the gloved fist protest by John Carlos and Tommy Smith at the 1968 Olympics. It was organized by MLS's Black Players for Change Coalition, and it will certainly go down in sports history, much like the 1968 protest. I'm Eric Krakauer, joined by Franco Panizo. Franco, you were chomping at the bit for this tournament to start, and you have been busy writing about it.
Yeah, finally, at long last, we have soccer again. We have Futbol again, and there was plenty to talk about after yesterday's 2-1 loss. Inter Miami fell at the hands of Orlando City in the first edition of is the Sunshine Clásico, El Clásico del Sol. Lots to talk about.
Before we get into the minutia of the game, was there anything that caught your attention about the game itself? The first game back. Everybody's very excited to actually see some U.S.-based soccer, but was there anything that, for you, was worthy of attention?
There was some rust, obviously. You expected there to be some rust, but I didn't think there was as much as maybe I thought. I think there was actually some decent spells of okay soccer, all things considered, and I think that's a positive takeaway because it should only get better as the players get physically get into better levels and as they get their sharpness back. So I thought it was a decent starting point.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'll also note that it was great to listen to the players bark at each other in different languages.
Yeah.
One of the things that I've really enjoyed about having soccer back, and I know that we have a lot of fake crowd noise in most leagues, but I've enjoyed listening to the players. I enjoy the sounds of the ball being kicked. It reminds me of my first days covering soccer, mostly preseason soccer, in Portugal and then here in the U.S. So I enjoyed that a lot. But anyway, yeah, go ahead.
No, it's funny you say that because I was actually just looking at a tweet before we started this, and it was from a supporter talking about the fact that there is no fake crowd noise and the reasons behind that. And, their tweet, one part of their tweet was like, you should assess how much you really love the sport if you can't watch it without crowd noise or without, artificial noise not being present when there's no fans in the stand. And I kind of agree with that. I mean, the love for the game is, you love the sport. And like you said, I really, really enjoyed hearing the players bark at each other and the instructions being shouted and everything that you could hear over the course of the 90 minutes. Obviously, once fans can get back in there and you can hear the crowds rocking again, that'll be fantastic. But for now, I have zero problem with listening to the games as they're happening in real life.
Yeah, listen, I think that assessment is a little bit harsh on the part of the person who wrote that tweet, but I can understand the sentiment behind it. And I definitely agree that you should be able to enjoy these games without crowd noise. Although I have to admit that as somebody who calls games for a living, it is much easier, even with the fake noise being infused into the call, because it really helps with the pathos of the game. It helps with the way that you utter the words that you are uttering in the moment, and it makes you a lot less self-aware of what it is that you are saying. But anyway, enough about that. Let's actually get to the game itself. So let's get to it. Okay, let's talk about what happened on the field of play. Inter Miami drew first blood. Juan Agudelo tapping in a Victor Ulloa cross. A nice bit of play from Inter Miami. His goal was canceled out by Chris Mueller, who put a finishing touch to Nani's square ball. The former Portuguese international would then add the killer blow at the 97th minute. In between those goals, there were a couple of opportunities that went each way. Agudelo missing a sitter, maybe a little harsh, and Mueller forcing a very good save from Luis Robles. There was also a very unfortunate and unsettling injury to Andres Reis. I think that was stunning about that was the amount of time it took to get medical staff or the stretcher actually on the pitch, with Agudelo actually helping out at one moment. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. Let's just go through the 11. Robles, the captain, started in between the sticks. A back three of Nico Figal, Andres Reyes, and Ben Sweat. That was perhaps the surprise inclusion. A left back as a center back, although, as Franco will tell you, he's played in that position before. Dylan Nealis was the right wing back. Mikey Ambrose was on the opposite side. Victor Ulloa and Will Trapp played in the double pivot. Matias Pellegrini and Wes Morgan played behind Juan Agudelo, the goal scorer. Franco, let's start with an overall impression of this game before we sort of drill down on the minutia. What did you think?
Well, first I'm going to say, how much phlegm did you just hawk up there when you said Andres Reyes the first time you mentioned his name? No, just look, over the course of the 90 minutes, if we're going to be honest and real and assess the game, or I'm going to assess the game how I saw it, I don't think Inter Miami had a very good game. First half, they were completely up. They were just looked disjointed, couldn't play through Orlando City's effective pressure, and just didn't have much to their attack and to their game. There was that one play, like you mentioned, that Matias Pellegrini delivers a great ball that deserved a better finish from Juan Agudelo, but aside from that, there just wasn't much to Inter Miami in that first half. Now in the second half, they start combining a little more, they start playing a little bit better, and they get the goal. They continue to play well, moving the ball, combining. There was some good interplay on the right side, but then obviously the injury to Andres Reyes happens, and that kind of affects the game, which we can get into a little bit later. There was some choice words for the officiating of head referee Rubiel Vasquez, who in case you weren't aware, didn't know, he was also the head ref in the week 2 matchup against DC United. So plenty to talk about with regards to the officiating, but over the course of the 90 minutes, we're just talking about Inter Miami's performance. I don't think it was that convincing, and there's plenty of room for them to improve.
Well, let's start at the beginning and deal with the game chronologically. The thing that stuck in my mind in the beginning was how confusing Miami's buildup was, or attempts at building, because it's almost like they had too many players out wide and nobody centrally in front of Ulloa and Will Trapp, and that really hindered them significantly and pretty much played into the pressing that was displayed by Orlando, which was quite effective in the first 15 to 20 minutes. Having said that opportunity that fell to Juan Agudelo came against the run of play. Pellegrini, who at times was playing centrally, found space on the left and puts in a really good ball. I said that it was a sitter, perhaps a little bit harder than that, because I think it takes a little bit of a bounce before it gets to Agudelo, but he certainly should be putting that on frame. But to me, the biggest issue was there was nobody in the hole, that position that Pizarro would occupy.
Right. So just so that anybody that's maybe wondering, or we didn't mention Rodolfo Pizarro, or you didn't mention Rodolfo Pizarro in the starting lineup, he did not start. The official reason we were given is coach's decision. However, the more thorough explanation is he apparently picked up an injury days before this opener, this first game. He recovered in time to play, but there was concern about whether he would risk aggravating it if he came into this through the start, because the expectation was that it would be a very intense game with potentially a lot of hard fouls. So that's the reason he didn't start. And I agree with you that Inter Miami's game plan and Diego Alonso's game plan, which is something I want to touch on in detail on this episode, I don't think it was a very good one. And it's not just in hindsight, it's just because without Pizarro in the lineup, obviously they were just looking to attack down the wings. They were playing with the three center backs and the two wing backs, but the two wing backs are, even though they get forward, they're still defensive minded players. They're more defensive minded than they are creative. Then you have two center midfielders, but they're both holding midfielders. And then you had Pellegrini and Lewis Morgan on the wings. They are attacking players, clearly, and Agudelo up top. But like you said, there was nobody in the hole, and all Inter Miami was looking to do, apparently, was just go find space down the wings and whipping balls to Agudelo, who, again, this is something else we can talk about. He's not a pure number 9. He's not a traditional number 9. There's very few and far between that you found him in the box on the end of things. I just don't think the game plan worked. I don't think it helped Miami and play to its strengths and to play good soccer, which we didn't see much of over the course of the 90 minutes. Again, there was that spell early on in the second half. It produces a goal. Inter Miami needed more of that, needed more interplay, needed more combinations, and you didn't see that until it was late when the subs came in and tried to make things happen a little bit. But yeah, it was a confusing, disjointed performance, particularly in that first half.
Yeah, and it played into, as I noted before, it played into the press that Orlando was going with, because without somebody in the hole, they could really push up against Will Trapp and Ulloa, so they couldn't get the ball, and that forced Inter Miami to play long very often. I think I sort of understood what it was that Diego Alonso was trying to do. He wanted to create more than three passing channels, if you will, because even though Pellegrini and Wes Morgan were playing wide, they were playing slightly more centrally than the wing backs, and that would occupy the half spaces on the field, but it just never seemed to actually translate into that. And so very often, particularly when Pellegrini had the ball down the middle, there was a lot of indecision in transition, and I think that's what really cost Inter Miami. First half, that opportunity that fell to Juan Agudelo, and then there was a really good play down the left-hand side. A ball slipped through to Chris Mueller, and he tries to put it far post. That save by Robles was pretty fantastic, and we've seen one of those in each one of Inter Miami's first 3 games.
Yeah, Robles did well on that play. Think he, again, we'll get to it, think he could have done better on the equalizing goal. Defensively, I thought Inter Miami held up pretty well, especially when Ander Reyes was on the field. Once he came off with that scary injury, things changed a bit for Inter Miami. They had to put Victor Ulloa back there, and the whole complexion kind of changed a bit. But yeah, I mean, just going back to the point of the game plan and the personnel used, I just don't think Diego Alonso's idea worked for what he had out there, and I think he would have been better off. Rodolfo Pizarro is not starting. Okay, understood. He's recovering. Maybe he's not 100%. That's completely understandable. But then to go with so many players on the field that are so defensive minded, again, you have 3 center backs, 2 wing backs, and 2 holding midfielders. That gives you three attackers, but that can create and that can generate things in the final third. But that's just 3 players. The other players are still more defensive minded players. I think starting Lee Nguyen would have, instead of one of Will Trapp or Victor Ulloa, would have helped Inter Miami be able to keep the ball a little bit more, play through Orlando's press, because Will Trapp and Victor Ulloa aren't necessarily those type of players. Now, are they more technical players than other holding midfielders? And I'm not sure, but they're not necessarily players that play through the lines. And again, man, I think Diego Alonso kind of messed this one up, man. I think from the start, Inter Miami was kind of playing shorthanded.
It was a little aimless. Although I'm going to disagree a little bit. I think that the intention of having somebody like Ulloa next to Will Trapp is to release Will Trapp of his defensive duties a little bit, and I think part of that, or part of the plan, is also to have 3 center backs for that exact reason. Will Trapp is a guy who is better with the ball at his feet than he is without it, right? His defensive fragilities may be a little harsh, but have been noted time and again, particularly when he's playing with the U.S. national team.
But he's still seen as a number 6. He's not a box-to-box midfielder.
No, absolutely. He's a number 6, but he's a deep-lying playmaker as opposed to someone like Victor Ulloa, who can really mix it up physically.
But is he a playmaker? Because I don't really see Will Trapp pinging long balls from one side to the field to the other. He's kind of a distributor. He just helps move the ball forward, but he needs somebody next to him that can also help him with that. And I don't think him and Ulloa are working as a partnership. I just don't. I think they're too similar. And look, Ulloa in the games that we've seen or that I've seen so far, these first three games, I think Ulloa is the player that's more capable of jumping into the attack and either taking shots. I think it was against LAFC that he took a couple of shots from far out. And in this one, obviously, he makes that great incisive run early in the second half into a position that maybe he wasn't supposed to go to, but he just saw the space and he took it because he collides into a player on his way into that space. And then he unleashes a great low ball for Agudelo to push home. So I think Ulloa is the more capable player in terms of...
Well, he's the more up and down player out of the two. If you're gonna play with two midfielders without anybody in the hole, and you're playing with three center backs and two wing backs, you're going to need somebody to make those runs, those vertical runs into the box. Those runs were non-existent in the first half. The first time that Ulloa does it and he attacks the half space, it creates a goal. So I think that you're right. That movement that Ulloa presented is the kind of movement that I don't think Will Trapp is too comfortable with. And I think your initial assessment that including Lee Nguyen in the 11 is a good one. I'm just not sure I would take either one of those guys out. I think I would do either without Pellegrini or Morgan. And, of course, maybe you lose a little bit of width, but you still have Mikey Ambrose on the left and Nealis on the right, who are supposed to add that width. That's why this system is employed. And I think there was a little bit of a there were perhaps too many players who were designated to play similar roles. Pellegrini and Morgan also wide players, although they had a little bit of more liberty to come in centrally. I also thought that Agudelo in the first 20 minutes of the game didn't check into the midfield too often to make up for the fact that there wasn't that player in the hole. And when he did that, things did open up for Morgan on the right and Pellegrini a little bit on the left. But there was certainly, as you noted, an imbalance there.
Yeah, I mean, look, and I'll just say this so we don't harp or stay on just one area of the field. But look, if you're going to stick with Ulloa and Trapp, and that's going to be your two central midfielders, or in front of the back line, then you're not necessarily looking to play the most aggressive brand of soccer because again, they're not necessarily the most creative guys. So if that's who you want to go with, then maybe you're looking at a more defensive minded approach. And I understand Diego Alonso wants his teams to be tough and hard to play against, and that they scrap and that they are defensively organized. But if that's going to come at the cost of some attacking edge, then I mean, I'm not sure I agree with that, especially given how they said they want to play, and it's clear that they need attacking help, and that they need more, at least another signing in that part of the field, and they've talked about that, they've mentioned that. But over the course of these three games, and obviously there's been a long layoff between the second and the third, but in those three games, it's been clear Inter Miami needs a little more punch in the attack. And Rodolfo Pizarro is capable of providing that, but only to a certain extent. He's going to need help if Inter Miami is going to be the team that they want to be.
Let's talk about the injury real quick. I actually texted you. You and I were texting quite frequently while the game was going on, and I actually had texted you and mentioned that Dom Dwyer was playing a very physical game, and just outside of the margins of the law or the legal boundaries of the game. There was a late challenge, a couple of late challenges on Figal, particularly early on in the game, and I also want to focus on Figal in a little bit. And then there was a late challenge on Andres Reyes. All very late, all fouls. I think he should have been carded for at least one of those. He wasn't. And later on, early in the second half, he is trying to shield the ball, trying to body off Andres Reyes. He lifts his elbow and makes contact with the Colombian center back's throat. He goes to ground, seems to be having difficulty breathing, and ultimately has to be stretchered off. Now, I don't think, given what we saw earlier in the game, that particular circumstance, that particular moment where he strikes Reyes was dirty. I think his elbow was a little bit high, but I think he's just trying to shield the ball, as opposed to the other situations that I just delineated.
Yeah,
Do you agree?
I agree with you that I don't think there was that much malintent or any desire to hurt Andres Reyes on that play. I think he just put his arms up, as is normal in football and soccer, to try to shield yourself from your opponent, create more space for yourself to keep the ball, and he caught him, with a stray arm. Now, why it comes off so bad in a lot of people's eyes, in my opinion, is because of all the stuff that led up to that moment. There were a lot of fouls, or a handful of fouls that Dwyer had in that first half that were either late or that could be considered kind of cheap shots. There was one with Andres Reyes where he collides into him from the back as Reyes had already won position to head the ball. Reyes goes tumbling to the ground. He was holding his knee, and it looked like at one point, at least for a few seconds, that Reyes might have done some serious damage to his knee, but he got up, continued the game. There was also a collision or two with Nicolas Figal on Dwyer's part, and I remember yesterday watching the game, and I rewatched the game as I do every match that I cover in depth. During the whole discussion in between the sides as Reyes is getting tended to, Nicolas Figal's like, what's, essentially gesturing and saying, what's your problem, man? Like, why, you've done it once, twice. Like, what's up with you? But you mentioned this last week, I think before we started the last week's pod. Dom Dwyer is a master of the dark arts, and he is a player that's physical, and that's part of his game. So this was somewhat expected, and this is where Inter Miami was upset, and this is what, me and you have covered Luis Robles a long time, and he's always been very positive in terms of how he responds to questions, even tough questions. He's very, very professional. Very thoughtful. This was the one time I think I've ever seen him criticize a ref after a game publicly. I don't think I've ever seen, or I don't remember Luis Robles ever being this critical about a ref after a match. And he essentially said that he put the whole situation with Dom Dwyer and Andres Reyes that happened in the injury on Rubiel Vasquez, and his lack of giving Dom Dwyer a yellow card in that first half.
Control.
Yeah. So and I don't think Dom Dwyer was intentionally looking to hurt Andres Reyes on the play that he actually gets hurt on, but I think if he had maybe been booked in the first half, maybe he's not playing so loosely or as freely as he was, because obviously now he's on a booking and he's got to control himself a little bit more. And I think that's where Inter Miami had some frustration. Obviously, they gave up a late goal and they give up a game late, or they just give up a lead again. But I think it was a combination of things that led to that frustration and that sour taste that they had after the match. But I do agree that Dom Dwyer should have had a yellow in the first half. The fouls he got away with were a little ridiculous. But I mean that's the sport. Thankfully Andres Reyes, it was announced today by the team. He's doing okay. He's back in the bubble. He was released from the hospital. Doesn't seem to be an injury of severity. He's in isolation right now, and he will be until he's cleared to get back into the group after he receives, I guess, a couple of negative COVID tests. So that's good news on that part.
And I mentioned as we were about to talk about that the first challenges, Dwyer's first challenges, were on Nico Figal, who I think so far, along with Pizarro, is the standout player for Inter Miami. We saw all his qualities on display. He reads the game well. He's a tough tackler. And he made a couple of passes, one of them a pinpoint 30-yard pass from the right to find Mikey Ambrose or Pellegrini on the left-hand side. I think it was Pellegrini, actually. This guy is a very, very complete player, and I think in time will prove to be one of the elite center backs in the league.
Yeah, I think he had another fairly solid game. There were a couple moments that he didn't look where he made some interesting decisions, and I think out of the 3 games that they've played to date, I think this was his weakest one. I don't want to sound overly negative, but I think out of the 3 matches he's played, the first 2 were better by a margin. So he obviously had a part to play in the game-winning goal. The ball ricochets off of him because he's not looking at the ball at all. He's just focused on his man and has his back to the play, and it falls to Nani, which, hey, I have to give you credit. You predicted Nani would score. He scored, so you were right about that.
Completely different second half, and he was not looking at the ball. He was looking at Akindele, and that's what allows the ball to bounce, or that's what leads to the ball bouncing off his back and landing at the feet of Nani. Well, let's talk about the goals real quick. And a player who I thought had a pretty decent first half was Nealis. Dylan Nealis on the right. He tried to get involved in the attacks when they were in the final third. He did a lot of running, but he looked very poor in both goals conceded. The first one completely outpaced by Nani, who is 12 years older than Nealis, and never.
It's like you versus me.
Yes, exactly. I play the role of Nani in this situation, and then Nealis is not only bamboozled by Nani for the second goal because Nani sort of drops his shoulder and goes one way, but Nealis stops running, never tracks Nani, and that is why he's wide open. Yes, the ball does bounce off of Figal, but had Nealis been on top of Nani, even though he slap shots it very quickly, I don't think that ball would have actually gotten to him. It may not have gotten to him, or at least he could have gotten a block. So not a good look for Nealis, even though I thought he had a pretty decent first half.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say that I thought this is kind of the opposite of most of the players that we've talked about to this point. I thought Nealis had a very overall good 90 minutes. He started out really well. He faded and finished very poorly. I think if you get, if we had to break it down, I think he had 70 very solid minutes. He played a part in the build-up to Inter Miami's goal by bringing the ball inside. And again, the first 70 minutes were probably very good for him. The last 20 the last 20 and change, because there was a lot of stoppage time, there was very, very poor. And maybe it was a case of heavy legs. Obviously, they don't necessarily have peak fitness right now, given the long layoff. Maybe that played a part, but yeah, he was involved in giving up both of those goals. So obviously, when you put it all in a balance, he didn't have the greatest games. But yeah, man, it was tough. And I think that second goal, just to quickly touch on that, the game winner, he doesn't. He definitely should have tracked Nani 100%. But I think maybe part of it is that he expected the third center back, which at that point was Victor Ulloa, to pick him up. Victor Ulloa, when you watch the replay of that goal, is kind of in no man's land off to the side instead of occupying that space in the middle where Nani ends up finding the ball. So I think both of them shoulder some blame there. But Ulloa, again, is not a center back. He was playing there in a pinch given the situation. Nealis has to do a better job of tracking his runner. And that ended up being the difference right there. That play gave Orlando City the 3 points and the first win in the Sunshine Classico.
Yeah, and look, it's much easier to track your runner than it is to pass off the player that you are marking, particularly in a situation like that at the tail end or dying embers of the game. So mostly on Nealis, I would say. But again, I spoke to somebody who covers Inter Miami earlier today, and he was quite critical of Nealis. But I did say, look, Nani was a bit of a non-factor in the first half, even when Orlando had more of the ball, and that was in part due to Nealis's defending.
Nealis completely took him out of the game for the first 70 minutes. After that, Nani turned on the jets or used his experience and took advantage of maybe some tired legs or Nealis' inexperience. But again, yeah, you're right. I think the first 70 minutes, Nealis was on point. The last 20 minutes, not so much.
All in all, Inter Miami still showing some growing pains, and it's going to be painful for the supporters that the very first Sunshine Classico between these teams was won by Orlando City. Nani, the difference maker in the end, and now more pressure on Inter Miami on the 2 remaining games. They need at least a win and a draw to move through to the knockout stages. Let's move on and preview that next game, which is against the Philadelphia Union. All right, before we actually preview Inter Miami's second game of the group against Philadelphia, let's go over the shifting scenario, or the now shifted scenario of the group stage, because FC Dallas was forced to withdraw from the tournament due to positive COVID tests. That was before the tournament actually kicked off, and Nashville is now the second team forced to withdraw because of their own positive tests. And what that does is it makes Group A smaller. Now only 4 teams in Group A, which are Orlando, Miami, NYCFC, and Philadelphia. Chicago, who was in Group A, slots into Group B with Seattle, Vancouver, and San Jose. So some changes there, but the groups actually look like normal groups now, because each one of the 6 groups has 4 teams. But let's look ahead to the game against Philadelphia. And Franco, you and I talked about Philadelphia on the last pod. We both agreed that it would probably be the most difficult game that Inter Miami would play in the group stage. And now they also have to play New York City FC, which is an equally strong team. New York City FC losing 1-0 to the Philadelphia Union. Alejandro Bedoya scoring the goal for Philadelphia, one where I think Sean Johnson could perhaps have done a little bit better.
Absolutely.
To parry it away. It was a tight angle from Bedoya, but I think they deserved the win, Philadelphia. NYCFC didn't look that fluid, certainly not the team that a lot of people expect to be vying for MLS Cup honors. So going into this game, given what we've seen from Inter Miami and given what we've seen from Philadelphia Union, what are your thoughts?
It's going to be a tough ask, man. It's going to be a tough ask. Inter Miami obviously needs points after getting 0 from the opener against Orlando City. And now you're playing probably the 2 other best teams that were originally in Group A, teams that have established rosters. New York City FC obviously has going through a coaching change, but the roster that's in place has been together for a couple seasons now. Philadelphia, same boat, and they're still with the same head coach that they've known for years. So these are going to be 2 well-oiled or well-drilled teams that know exactly how they want to play and understand each other and have chemistry. Yes, there will be rust, as we saw in the Union versus NYCFC game, as we saw in Inter Miami's opener, but the challenge is going to be much tougher because these are 2 teams that know each other and that have that chemistry advantage that Inter Miami is looking for, that chemistry that Inter Miami is looking for. So there's an advantage there in that aspect. If we're just talking about the Philadelphia Union specifically, it's a team that's very tough defensively. Even when they give up chances, they have a great goalkeeper in Andre Blake at the back. We saw that against NYCFC. He made a handful, or at least a couple of very good saves to preserve the shutout and the victory. So it's going to be a really tough ask. Maybe Inter Miami will have more of the ball than they saw against Orlando City, not only because Philadelphia will allow them to have it, but because Inter Miami will probably have Rodolfo Pizarro in from the start. You have to imagine that Diego Alonso doesn't rest him or doesn't sit him from the beginning of this one, given that Miami needs points badly. So expect Miami to have more of the ball and play a different game. But again, it's going to be a battle. Philadelphia Union are a tough team, and they have capable players of scoring, experienced players. Alejandro Bedoya, like you said, made the difference today off a finish that I agree probably should have been saved, but Bedoya takes a shot and tests the keeper, and it goes in for him, and then that ends up being the difference in a tight game. And That's what I think what we can expect. Another tight affair, another tight match. Don't see a lot of goals in this one. But Inter Miami's going to have to be better with the ball and more clinical when it does get chances, because it hasn't created many chances in over the course of these first 3 games of its inaugural season. So it needs to be clinical in the chances that it does produce. It needs to take better care of the ball if they're going to have a chance to get a result against the Union, which is what they need.
Yeah, one thing that I like about the Philadelphia Union, and I went to see them play Atlanta in the playoffs, is that they can hurt you in many ways. Up top, you got a guy like Przybyłko, who is a big striker. He's got a very good left foot. He can hit them from outside the box. He's good in the air. So that's something that the Inter Miami is going to have to contend with. Curious to see whether Ilsinho starts a second game. I was surprised to see him start this game against NYCFC, to be honest. But the system that Jim Curtin, who you alluded to, has been there for quite a while, and a few seasons ago, there were some questions as to whether he'd remain in Philadelphia, given how poorly they were doing, not getting into the playoffs. He's really devised a system that blends youth and experience really well. You look at some of the young players. The one who stands out is Brandon Aronson, who has a free role. He seems to have built a system to get the most out of him with tough hitters like Jose Andres Martinez and Bedoya behind him. So I think the battle for that Inter Miami is going to have to win is in the midfield. And if they're not able to contend with Philadelphia Union's midfield, they're going to get flooded with aerial balls from the wings. And there you have Przybyłko, who's just so good in the air. It's going to be a really tough game. But again, it's about matchups. And I think that Inter Miami have the personnel to withstand or to compete with this Philadelphia Union team. But as you said, there's the familiarity factor, the fact that these guys have played together, the fact that they had a pretty good run in the playoffs last season, and they are, for me, one of the contenders to win this entire tournament.
So I've got a question for you. If you're Diego Alonso, Eric, what's your midfield? Because you just said that the midfield's the key to the game. I agree it's going to be very important. I also think, like I said earlier, you're going to need someone to score goals up top. They're going to need to be clinical against McKenzie and Elliott. But in the midfield, who do you start? Who do you go with? Because I wrote on SBIsoccer.com, and like I said earlier on this show, I'm putting in Lee Nguyen, man. I get it's going to be a battle, and that might tempt Diego Alonso to go with Ulloa and Trapp again, along with Pizarro. But I think you need someone like Lee Nguyen, and I know he doesn't provide the steal that Ulloa and Trapp can bring. But he
gives you the control and the possession.
Exactly, and so therefore you don't need as much defensive steal, and you don't need as much range and ability to break things up, because you have more of the ball and you can take care of the ball better. Sometimes they say the best defense is a good offense. Well, I think that is the case to put in Lee Nguyen. But that's my viewpoint. I'm curious to hear what you think. What would you do if you're Diego Alonso, if you had the choice?
Yeah, you know what? I agree with you. I thought that Lee Nguyen in the cameo role that he played against Orlando, I thought he did very well. He was stringing play together. I thought Pizarro came into the game well as well, but I thought Lee Nguyen did more to connect the different sectors, defense, midfield, and attack, and I think he earned himself a start. One of the big question marks is whether Andres Reyes is going to be able to play in this game, right? Because if he's unavailable, does Alonso go with 3 center backs as opposed to 2? So I'm actually going to say that he's going to go with 2 center backs in this game, with a double pivot of Ulloa and Will Trapp. I think he's going to have Lee Nguyen ahead of those 2 guys, and then up top, I think he's going to go with Lewis Morgan. I think I would go Lewis Morgan. I would go with Pizarro, and I would go since he scored a goal. And I thought he had a decent game, I would go to Agudelo. So a 4-3-3 or a 4-2-3-1 sort of formation.
So you're dropping Pellegrini from the lineup.
I'm dropping Pellegrini. I thought he was involved in the goal. quick thinking to give the ball back to Ulloa to square it, flash the ball across the six for Agudelo to put the tap in. But I wasn't convinced with his decision-making on the ball. And I think it would be, I think Pizarro is definitely going to start. And if I have to pick between Pellegrini and Morgan, I'm going to go with Morgan because I was more impressed with the Scotsman.
So I actually thought this was Pellegrini's best game in an Inter Miami jersey to date. Thought even though not everything, every move or every decision he made came off, he was more involved and more active and capable of causing problems to the defense. So I'm not sure if I would drop him. I'm not sure Diego Alonso drops him, although, given his age and given that he is young and probably inconsistent at this point in his career, given how young he is, it's possible that he drops Pellegrini. But so you're doing Lee Nguyen at 10 and Pizarro on the left, right? Is that correct? Okay.
Yeah.
And listen, so when you touched on the center backs, and I'll say if Reyes can't go, the good news for Inter Miami is that Roman Torres is back. He was suspended for this first game due to the red card he received against DC United. He will be back and available for this one. So you have a player with experience that has played with Nico Figal, not necessarily the best passer of the ball or the most technical center back on the Inter Miami roster, but he gives you at least some comfort, some level of comfort that he can defend and get that part of the job done at the back. Look, I would go with Lee Nguyen. I think, like you said, his connection and his smoothness on the ball and the way he was able to understand himself with Rodolfo Pizarro when they both came in. That's something I also saw in preseason in the one game that they played together in front of the public. They understood each other because they're both players that like to have the ball at their feet and like to combine and look for that interplay. And again, I saw it against Orlando City, and that is something Inter Miami needs more of. I would start Lee Nguyen. I don't think Diego Alonso starts Lee Nguyen. I'm not convinced that he gives him the nod here, even though he has 5 subs, which maybe plays a factor into starting him. But I think, like you said, Ulloa and Trapp, given that this will be a battle, I think Pizarro gets the nod at the 10. I think you're going to see Pellegrini and Lewis Morgan on the wings, and I think Julian Carranza will get the start up top. I don't think there was enough from Agudelo on the day to be convinced that he can do it as the 9. And something, again, I wrote, and I want to touch on here before we wrap things up, because I know it's getting late. Juan Agudelo is not a number 9. He has never been a number 9. It's not who he is. It's not his game. He was misused in the game against Orlando City. I know it's tempting, and a lot of coaches have tried to use Agudelo as a straight, pure striker, but it's not his game. He likes to play with the ball at his feet, doesn't necessarily play in or make runs in behind the defense. He likes to combine, not necessarily doesn't have the goal scoring instincts. Yes, he scored against Orlando City, but that's only he's a hybrid. He's like a 9.5. Like, not quite a 10, not quite a 9, definitely not a winger. I mean, Bruce Arena used him last year at some center midfield. There's a reason why he's bounced around all these different positions. It's because he doesn't have a clearly defined spot.
Right, and this was a point that I made to you yesterday as well when we were texting, right? Mm-hmm. So this is a guy who has suffered because he doesn't have a designated position. He's versatile, but he's not particularly spectacular at any one thing in any one position, and that's sad because he obviously has a lot of talent.
He's a confident player, and you can see that the way he controls the ball, moves the ball, looks to play. I don't see him as the 9. I think Carranza gets the start up top. Maybe can try to stretch that defense a little bit more. He's got a little bit more wheels to him. And then at the back, obviously Robles. I think Nilis gets the nod again. Figal, Reyes, and Ben Sweat.
Yeah, I mean, not so different. I think yours is more likely to happen than mine, but I was answering what I would do and not what Diego Alonso does. But I think you're right. I'm not sure I saw enough from Carranza to start. Having said that, he's coming back from an injury. Everybody was tired by the time he was put into the game. and a tournament like this where players are just starting to get into shape, two consecutive games might be a little bit difficult for any player. So that's a good point for sure.
I didn't see much from him in this game either. This was his Inter Miami debut, but I think because of the matchups, I think Diego Alonso might have to roll the dice on this one because he knows that Agudelo might not necessarily bring him that threat in the final third or that consistent threat in the final third that Inter Miami needs more of. So I think he could go with Carranza. And just to stress this out, I would start Lee Nguyen over probably Will Trapp if it were up to me. I'd keep the formation exactly the same that I said, 4-2-3-1. With the same exact personnel, I would just swap in Lee Nguyen for Will Trapp. But that's what I would do. And I don't get paid the big bucks that Diego Alonso does. So we'll see how it plays out. It's only a few days away now, so another game to look forward to and to get excited about and to analyze and dissect. So it's gonna be interesting because there's a lot of things riding on it for Inter Miami. So a lot of pressure.
And if we learn anything about the first two games that they played in the regular season, is that the second performance was a lot better than the first. So that's something for Inter Miami supporters to be optimistic and confident about. All right, we've come to the end of this show. Just a quick reminder that you can download the pod wherever pods are available. You can leave us a review, and you can follow the pod on every single social media platform. Franco adds a lot of videos, basically getting you up to date with all the latest news about Inter Miami and analysis of that news.
Yeah, if you want to see Diego Alonso's very short, winded press conference where he was just so angry that he was answering things in one sentence cliches, go to Miami Total Football on YouTube. You can see it. I uploaded the whole thing. He didn't say very much. He was clearly upset. But yeah, we're definitely bringing you all the news and updates from the MLS's back tournament with regards to Miami.
And Franco and I will return after the game against the Philadelphia Union. So with that, until next time, Big Soccer Heads.